They tried to kill the billionaire CEO, but her quiet driver didn't even flinch. Then he revealed one terrifying—
The gunshot cracked through the windshield before Elise Warren even finished screaming his name. Glass exploded over her lap. The black SUV fishtailed across 3 lanes of rain-slick highway, and the quiet driver she had hired 3 weeks earlier didn't flinch. He just looked in the rearview mirror once and said, almost gently, "Ms. Warren, get down." They sent a second car. If stories like this pull something out of you, subscribe, like the video, and tell me where you're watching from before we begin. Because this one doesn't just end, it stays with you. Elise dropped to the floor between the seats in a blur of diamonds, torn silk, and breathless panic. She was the kind of woman magazines called untouchable. Young CEO, iron discipline, billion-dollar logistics empire, the face of sharp intelligence in a softer dress than anyone expected. Untouchable didn't feel accurate when bullets were punching holes through her armored side panel. "Where is security?" she shouted. "In the decoy car," the driver said. "What?" "You told them to stay 2 vehicles back so you could avoid the board photographers." She remembered. Of course she remembered. 30 minutes earlier, she had snapped at her security team for making her look paranoid in front of the cameras. She wanted a clean arrival to the charity gala. No bodyguards hovering. No headlines about threats. No weakness. Now someone was trying to kill her because she wanted a better photo. Another black sedan lunged up on their left, window lowering, barrel rising. Elise pressed herself against the floor mat and let out a broken sound she didn't recognize as her own. The driver cut the wheel so hard, the SUV kissed the concrete divider. Sparks flared. The gunman's first 3 rounds flew wild. In the same motion, the driver reached across with one hand, shoved Elise lower, and accelerated into a gap that did not look large enough for hope, much less a vehicle. The sedan clipped their rear quarter panel and spun into traffic. "You said your name was Daniel," Elise gasped. "It is." "Drivers don't do this!" He said nothing, which frightened her more. The rain thickened. Sirens somewhere behind them, her security detail shouting over the comms. But Daniel didn't answer the frantic voices coming through the dashboard speaker. He drove like a man who had already accepted the worst thing that could happen and therefore feared nothing else. That should have been impossible. By the time they slid into an underground garage beneath a half-constructed tower owned by Warren Global, Elise's hands were bleeding from gripping broken glass. Daniel killed the engine, stepped out, scanned the shadows, then opened her door. "Can you walk?" She stared up at him. For 3 weeks she had barely noticed him. Quiet. Early 40s maybe. Broad shoulders hidden under simple shirts. Wedding ring gone, a pale line still there. He never volunteered conversation. Never looked too long. Never tried to impress her the way men around power often did. Human Resources said he had excellent references and a clean file. Single father. Needed stable work. Good with defensive driving certification. None of that explained the blood on his cheek, the cold steadiness in his eyes, or why he looked like he'd done this before enough times to be bored by it. "Who are you?" Elise whispered. Before he could answer, garage lights snapped on. Her security chief, Malcolm Reed, stormed toward them with 6 armed men. They stopped when they saw Daniel standing between Elise and everyone else. Not behind her, between. Malcolm's face hardened. "Step away from the CEO." Daniel didn't move. Elise was still shaking. "Malcolm, lower your weapon." "I can't do that," Malcolm said, staring at Daniel like a ghost had just stepped out of a grave. "Because your driver isn't just a driver." A beat of silence. Then Malcolm said the words that split the night in 2. "He's Nathan Vale." Elise frowned through adrenaline. The name meant nothing to her, but every armed man in that garage tightened like a wire pulled too far. Daniel, Nathan, closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, as if hearing an old sentence pronounced again. Malcolm swallowed. 10 years ago, Nathan Vale was the operative they sent when a kidnapping couldn't go public, when diplomats vanished, when mercenaries crossed borders and governments wanted miracles with no fingerprints left behind. His voice dropped. There are people who still say he once walked into a compound alone and came out with 11 hostages and no living captors. Elise stared at the man who had packed her daughter's forgotten lunchbox into the car yesterday and apologized for being late because his son had a fever. "That's impossible," she said. Nathan finally looked at Malcolm. "That file should be buried." "It was," Malcolm snapped, "which means you buried it." And suddenly, the room changed. This wasn't just about an attack anymore. This was about why a man like that had chosen to sit quietly behind a wheel for a woman he'd never met. Elise's voice came out hoarse. "Why are you here?" Nathan didn't answer her. Instead, he looked at Malcolm and said, "If you still have any loyalty left, get her somewhere with one entrance and no glass." Malcolm's jaw flexed. "You don't give orders here." Nathan turned to Elise. "Then listen carefully. The men on the highway weren't freelancers. They knew your route change before your own second team did. This wasn't a leak. It was built inside your house." The words hit harder than the bullets had. Elise looked at Malcolm. Malcolm looked insulted, wounded even, but not surprised enough. That was the first moment something cold entered her chest and stayed there. They moved her into a concrete conference room on the 43rd floor. No windows. One steel door. The city thundered below, unaware that its most photographed executive was sitting barefoot on a boardroom chair with dried blood on her hands, trying to understand whether the man who saved her life was there to protect her, or to finish a job nobody else could. Malcolm insisted on posting guards outside and demanded Nathan surrender his phone, wallet, and any concealed weapon. Nathan handed over a wallet, a dead phone, no weapon. Malcolm smirked. "See? He bleeds like anyone else." Nathan looked at him, calm as winter. "You still check ankles last. Bad habit." Malcolm's expression froze. One of the guards moved instinctively. Nathan didn't even glance down. He just lifted his pant leg enough to reveal an empty holster strapped above his boot. He had walked in armed and disarmed before they noticed. Elise felt something between fear and awe. Malcolm ripped the holster free, furious now, but Nathan let him. He almost seemed tired. When the door shut and the noise outside dimmed, Elise finally found enough air to speak. "My daughter is at home." Nathan's eyes sharpened instantly. "Who's with her?" "Her nanny. 2 house guards." He crossed the room and took the secure line off the wall before Malcolm's system could monitor the call. He dialed from memory. "How are you doing that?" Elise asked. He ignored her until a woman answered. He said only 4 words. "Put Lila on speaker." A tiny voice came through, sleepy and confused. "Mom?" Elise nearly broke. "I'm here, baby. Are you okay?" "Yes. Mr. Daniels said if thunder got loud, I should stay in the safe room and count backward from 20. So we did. Is this thunder?" Elise closed her eyes. Her daughter sounded brave, which somehow made everything worse. "No, sweetheart. Just stay with Maria." Another voice came onto the line, her nanny, frightened but steady. "The back gate camera is out. We've locked the house. 1 guard isn't answering." Nathan took the phone. "Listen carefully. Take Lila to the upstairs linen closet." "What?" "Now." "It's a closet." "It's the only room in the house that can't be seen from the neighboring hill. Do it." Maria didn't argue again. The line rustled. Small footsteps. A child breathing too fast. Elise stared. "How do you know my house layout?" Nathan hung up and met her gaze. Because this was the part he could no longer hide. "Because 6 years ago," he said quietly, "your husband hired me." Her stomach dropped. Her husband. Dead for 5 years. Evan Warren had been the charming half of the Warren myth. The one who smiled easily, who remembered names, who knew how to make a room feel chosen. Officially, he died in a boating accident. Quiet tragedy, private funeral, endless sympathy. Elise had grieved him and hated herself for also feeling relieved, because by then their marriage had already become a museum of closed doors and unanswered calls. Nathan's voice cut through her memory. He believed someone inside his company was building a pipeline for laundering military shipping routes. He thought it went higher than theft. Bribes, disappearances, human cargo once, maybe more. He was gathering proof. Elise shook her head. "No. If Evan believed that, he would have told me." Nathan's expression held no cruelty, only pity. He tried. That hurt far more than accusation. Nathan continued. "He hired me off-book to find out who was inside the network. I worked 3 months. Then Evan died before he could meet me with the final list." "No." Her voice cracked now. "No. He drowned." Nathan said nothing, and silence can be more violent than any answer. Elise stood so abruptly the chair fell behind her. "You're lying." "I wish I were." "You expect me to believe my husband was murdered and you just disappeared?"
I didn't disappear. I failed. That landed with a depth no performance could fake. For the first time, Elise saw not the efficient stranger or the impossible protector, but a man carrying a wound he had stopped trying to hide from himself. He died because the meeting point was compromised, Nathan said. Because I trusted the wrong person. The door opened. Malcolm walked in with a tablet and 3 members of the internal security team. Local police recovered the sedan. Burned car. No prints. He tossed the tablet onto the table. But that's not the interesting part. On screen was a photo of Nathan holding a little boy outside a public school. Your driver lied on his application, Malcolm said. No one named Daniel Cross exists in the state records before 4 years ago. But Nathan Vale does. Classified military history. Financial vanish. Then suddenly he reappears as a widowed mechanic with a son and no past. Nathan's face didn't change. Elise looked between them. Widowed?
Nathan said softly. My wife died in a house fire. A flicker crossed Malcolm's eyes, too fast for anyone not searching for it. Nathan saw it. So did Elise. And in that tiny flash, another emotional door opened. Say it, Nathan murmured. Malcolm gave a humorless laugh. You're not in a position to demand. My wife, Nathan said, voice low enough to chill the room. Say what you know. The other guards shifted. They did not like standing between these 2 men. They did not like how personal the air had suddenly become. Malcolm folded his arms. I know men like you always come apart at the same place. Not in war, not in blood. At home. He leaned closer. It's a shame about the fire. Elise felt nausea rise. Nathan didn't lunge, didn't shout. Somehow that was worse. He just asked, You lit it? Malcolm smiled. And that smile told the truth before words ever could. Elise whispered, Oh my God. Malcolm straightened, as if remembering she was still there. You want the truth, Elise? Fine. Your husband found things he shouldn't have. Nathan got too close. People had to be protected. People? She said, trembling. Or prophets? Malcolm's eyes flicked toward the table, toward the city, toward everything Warren Global controlled. Do you know how many governments depend on your roots? How many men get rich when paperwork vanishes for 6 minutes at a port? Evan wanted to burn down a machine because he suddenly discovered morality. He laughed once. And Nathan? Nathan was just the dog he hired. Dangerous, yes, but even dangerous dogs can be taught pain. Nathan finally moved, not fast enough to seem cinematic, fast enough to be terrifying. 1 second Malcolm was standing. The next he was on the table with his own arm twisted behind him, cheek pressed to polished wood, Nathan's forearm across his throat. 3 guards aimed weapons. None fired. Because Elise was too close. Because Nathan had calculated that. Because he always calculated everything. Where is the evidence? Nathan asked. Malcolm choked out a laugh anyway. Still protecting dead men? No. Living children. The words hung there. Elise thought of Lila upstairs in a closet, counting backward because a stranger had taught her how not to panic. Malcolm's grin faded. Nathan leaned closer. This didn't start with Elise, but it ends with her daughter if I don't know where Evan hid the files. For the first time, Malcolm looked honestly unsettled. Elise, Nathan said without looking at her. Your husband left you something. Something you never understood because you were never supposed to need it unless he was gone. Think. Think. Not about board meetings. Not about roots. About Evan. Elise's mind ran backward through birthdays, funerals, cold dinners, missed anniversaries, the terrible softness in his eyes the last week he was alive. Then it landed on one memory that had never fit. A children's music box. He had given it to Lila on her 3rd birthday, even though it wasn't really a child's toy. Too heavy. Too old. Brass ballerina, scratched lid, no sentimental story attached. He'd just said, Keep this safe. One day Mommy will know why. Her breath caught. The music box. Nathan lifted his head slightly. Where? In Lila's room. Malcolm swore. That was all Nathan needed. He released Malcolm, pivoted, knocked one guard's gun into the ceiling, elbowed another in the throat, and sent the third crashing into the glass credenza before anyone had fully understood that violence had resumed. Malcolm grabbed for his sidearm. Elise did the only reckless thing she had ever done in heels and blood. She kicked the gun under the table. Malcolm turned on her with pure betrayal on his face. "You?" he said. Her voice shook, but it held. "I trusted you." "And that," Malcolm spat, "is why you survived this long." Nathan slammed Malcolm into the wall hard enough to crack the drywall. Then he took Elise by the arm. "We have 3 minutes before the rest of his people lock this floor." "You're taking me home?" "I'm taking you to your daughter." The stairwell descent was chaos. No dramatic speeches, just breath, footsteps, alarms, and the raw humiliation of a powerful woman learning how many of the people around her power had never served her at all. On the 30th floor, shots rang from below. On the 28th, Nathan shoved Elise into a dark maintenance corridor and held a finger to his lips. Voices passed. Her pulse hammered so loudly she thought it would give them away. In the dark, she whispered, "Why stay? After what they did to your family, why become my driver?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, the confession felt pulled from somewhere he had kept locked for years. "Because I had a son, who stopped speaking for 8 months after his mother died. Because every night he asked if the bad men would come back. Because I told him no, even when I knew that was a lie." Nathan swallowed once. "Then I learned Malcolm was still breathing, still close to the people who killed my wife, still circling your family because Evan's file was never found." He looked at her in the dark. "I didn't take this job for money. I took it because if I failed once, children buried the cost. I don't fail twice." Something in Elise broke then, not from fear, but from shame. All those mornings she had barely looked at him. All those clipped instructions. The way she assumed silence meant smallness. And all that time he had been carrying grief like a loaded weapon, choosing not revenge first, but protection. When they reached the garage, the decoy vehicles were burning. "Of course they are," Elise whispered. Nathan half smiled, a tired, broken thing. "That's one way to put it." He stole a maintenance truck instead of another armored SUV. Elise stared at him. He said, "People hunting power look for expensive cars." He drove one-handed while calling Maria again. No answer. Then Lila's school-issued emergency tablet pinged with an incoming message. Just 3 words. "Where's your mom?" Elise went white. "They have her device." Nathan's jaw set. He turned the truck toward her estate and said the one sentence no mother can bear hearing. "They're already inside." The house that always looked like a magazine spread now looked like a crime scene pretending to be elegant. The front gate stood open. One guard was down beside the fountain. Another was missing. Nathan killed the headlights before the final curve and stopped 100 yards short. "Stay behind me." Elise shook her head. "My daughter is in there." So is a man who knows that. She hated him for being right. They entered through the service path. Rain tapped the hedges. Somewhere a motion light flicked on, then died. Nathan moved like memory itself, seeing corners before they appeared. Inside the kitchen, Maria lay zip-tied but alive, gagged and crying. Elise nearly ran to her, but Nathan stopped her. "Listen." Footsteps upstairs. One heavy, one light. Lila. Every instinct in Elise's body surged forward, but Nathan caught her wrist. "If you go now, they'll use you to freeze her." "How do you know?" "Because that's what I would do." He said it with such quiet disgust that Elise understood how many terrible things he had lived through. He cut Maria loose. "The closet?" Maria nodded frantically. "They found it. They took the box. The little girl bit him and ran. She's in the East Hall, second guest room, under the bed, I think." A crash upstairs. Elise moved. Nathan moved faster. By the time they reached the landing, Malcolm had Lila by the arm. She was crying, face streaked with tears, brave in the ugliest way children sometimes are, trying not to make it worse for the adults. In Malcolm's other hand was the brass music box. "Elise," he called almost warmly. "Tell your attack dog to stand down." Lila saw her mother and sobbed. "Mommy." Elise's knees nearly gave out. "Please, she's 6. "She's leverage," Malcolm corrected. Nathan stepped into view, empty hands raised. "Let her go." Malcolm laughed. You still think this ends with honor? No, Nathan said. I think it ends with me. There it was. The kind of line that should sound theatrical, except in that moment, it sounded like a man giving a weather report. Malcolm lifted the gun to Lila's head. Elise made a sound beyond language. Open the box, Malcolm told Nathan. Nathan stared at it. You don't know how? Evan loved puzzles. Cute little insurance policy. Open it. Nathan looked at Elise. Do you trust me? It was a terrible question to ask a woman standing 10 feet from her daughter's death. But somehow, she knew this was not about the box. It was about the next second. Yes, she whispered. Nathan's gaze slid past Malcolm to the antique mirror behind him, then to Lila, then back. Lila, he said softly, as if they were back in the car and he was reminding her to take her lunchbox. Do you remember the game we played? About statues? The child hiccuped, confused. The one where, when I say moonlight, you drop flat and cover your ears. Malcolm frowned. Nathan repeated, Do you remember? Lila nodded once, trembling. Malcolm tightened his grip. Don't. Moonlight. Lila vanished downward in a desperate collapse at the exact instant Nathan threw the music box. It hit the mirror. Glass burst. Malcolm fired at the movement. Nathan was already inside the shot, slamming Malcolm's wrist into the doorframe. The gun went off again. Elise screamed. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of fists, blood, splintered wood. Malcolm fought like a desperate man with wealth behind him and prison ahead of him. Nathan fought like a widower. That difference decided everything. When it ended, Malcolm lay on his back, choking, Nathan's forearm on his throat, a shard of mirror pressed against his skin. Where are the backups? Nathan demanded. Malcolm spat blood and smiled through ruined teeth. You kill me, they bury it all. Nathan pressed harder. Elise, Malcolm croaked, eyes finding her even then, hunting one final wound. Ask him where he was the night Evan died. The room froze. Nathan looked up, and the silence that followed hurt more than the fight. Elise's voice shook. Answer him. Nathan sat back slowly, as if every bone in his body had turned to rust. I was late. Those two words carried oceans. He called me, Nathan said. He said he had enough. He wanted to meet at the marina. I was with my wife and son. It was my son's birthday. I told myself 10 more minutes wouldn't matter. His face finally cracked, just a little. By the time I got there, the boat was already burning. Elise stared at him through tears she hated. Hated because they weren't simple anymore. Not just grief, not just anger. Something messier. Human. You could have saved him? I don't know. His voice dropped. That's the punishment. Malcolm laughed weakly from the floor. There it is, your hero. Elise looked at Nathan for a long time. Then at her daughter, alive and shaking and crawling toward her. Then at Malcolm. No, she said quietly. A hero would have left when it hurt too much. He stayed. That was the moment Malcolm truly lost. The police arrived with the last of the loyal security team and federal investigators Nathan had alerted hours earlier through channels Malcolm didn't know still existed. The music box's hidden chamber contained a key. The key opened a private storage unit under a false name. Inside were Evan's backups, ledgers, port logs, recorded calls, names that reached into customs offices, private contractors, and 2 of Warren Global's own board members. The scandal detonated by morning. News anchors said Elise Warren had bravely cooperated. They didn't say she sat on her closet floor before dawn, holding her sleeping daughter and reading her dead husband's final note with both hands because one kept shaking too much. It was addressed to her. If you're reading this, it means I ran out of time. I'm sorry for all the ways I disappeared before I died. I thought protecting you meant carrying everything alone. It only made liars easier to hide. If Nathan gets this to you, trust him. If he doesn't, trust what the truth costs. She cried then. Not pretty. Not private. The kind that empties a person and still doesn't feel like enough. Later that morning, after statements and medics and cameras held back at the gate, Elise found Nathan sitting on the back steps with a bandage over his shoulder, staring at the gray edge of sunrise. Her daughter was asleep inside. His son, she had learned, was with a neighbor across town, safe but terrified. Elise sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. Then she asked, "Were you ever going to tell me who you were?" "No." "That's honest." "I'm trying it for the first time in a while." A tired laugh escaped her despite everything. It surprised them both. She looked at him. Really looked. Not the myth Malcolm named. Not just the weapon. A father with scarred hands. A man who had outlived too much. Someone who knew what it meant to fail and still stand back up because a child needed breakfast in the morning. "My daughter trusts you," Elise said. Nathan stared ahead. Children are reckless that way. So are grieving adults. He finally turned. "There's more coming," he said. "Board fallout, lawsuits, people who'll claim ignorance, and men who'll try to scare you quiet. If you keep pushing this, it won't be over soon." Elise thought of Evan, of silence dressed as strategy, of how power rotted when fear sat in the center of it. Then she thought of Lila learning to count backward in the dark, because the grown-ups around her had built a world where closets became safe rooms. "No," Elise said. "It won't." Nathan nodded once, like a soldier hearing weather conditions before battle. She stood, then paused. "I'm not asking you to be my driver anymore." Something unreadable crossed his face. Maybe relief. Maybe loss. "Okay," he said. "I'm asking if you'd consider staying." He looked genuinely caught off guard for the first time. "As what?" Elise glanced toward the house where her daughter slept, and morning light was finally beginning to touch the broken windows. "As someone my family doesn't have to lie to." Nathan lowered his eyes. The answer didn't come quickly. Maybe because men like him don't trust peace when it knocks softly. Maybe because the most dangerous thing in the world for a wounded person is hope. At last, he said, "My son would need to meet yours." Elise smiled through tears. "That sounds fair." He stood with a wince, still human enough to hurt, still haunted enough never to look entirely unguarded again. But he stayed. And months later, when the trials began and the board fell, and headlines turned from scandal to reform, people kept asking the same question in different forms. How had Elise Warren survived a machine built to consume anyone who challenged it? They expected answers about security budgets, federal cooperation, risk protocols. The truth was stranger. A powerful woman survived because one broken man, who had already lost almost everything, chose, quietly and without promise of thanks, to keep one little girl from ever needing to count backward in the dark again. And maybe that's why the most dangerous person in her house was never the one carrying a gun. It was the man who had every reason to become a monster, and decided not to. So when they said the CEO never needed protection, they were almost right. Because what she really needed was someone brave enough to stand in front of her long before she knew she was in danger.